Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, depending on where you are in the world, and a very warm welcome to tonight's live stream. I have the honor and the privilege of bringing to you a discussion with the beloved, the lovable, the absolutely gorgeous but completely misguided Apostate Prophet, who I can see laughing in the background, so hopefully he appreciates the intro. But before I bring him on, I just want to do the usual, and we will start in a prayer. The Lord is King. Be the people never so impatient. He sitteth between the cherubims. Be the earth never so unquieted. The Lord is great in Zion, and high above all people. They shall give thanks unto thy name, which is great, wonderful, and holy. The king's power loveth judgment. Thou hast preparest equity. Thou hast executed judgment and righteousness in Jacob. O magnify the Lord our God, and fall down before his footstool, for he is holy. Moses and Aaron among his priests, and Samuel among such as call upon his name. These called upon the Lord, and he heard them. He spake unto them out of the cloudy pillar, for they kept his testimonies, and the law that he gave them. Thou heardest them, O Lord our God, thou forgavest them, O God, and punishest their own inventions. O magnify the Lord our God, and worship him upon his holy hill, for the Lord our God is holy. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So I'm going to bring on the Apostate Prophet in just a few seconds. However, for all of you that are watching, the conversation that we're about to have is about metaphysics, science, and God. It's not a debate; it's a discussion. And without much further ado, here is the mighty man himself. Hello, hello, hello.
Hello. Oh, how are you doing?
I'm all right. Thanks be to God. How are you, Apostate Prophet?
Good, good. Thank you. Thanks be to you.
You're welcome. Is life treating you well?
Yeah, it's pretty good, pretty good. I was just working out and rushed home. I realized that I got the time wrong because of the time zone differences.
Oh, yeah.
And
that was a good save then, wasn't it?
Yeah. No, that's why
it could have been a great Twitter, for me, like Apostate Prophet runs from discussion. But you've pulled it back. You've pulled it back.
Yeah. Gladly, I realized in the last half hour. Oh, wait a minute! It's now.
How close is your gym?
By the
way, guys, we said we were going to do drinks. So this is my favorite drink. It's port. And what's your favorite drink?
Oh, I just have a Diet Coke, to be honest.
Is that your favorite drink?
I rushed and got myself Diet Coke here, but it's not my favorite drink, actually.
What's your favorite drink?
My favorite drink is a completely innocent, non-alcoholic, what's it called? The Bai pineapple coconut drink that I love very much, which many people might find weird, but that's how I live.
So you can take the Apostate Prophet out of Islam, but you can't take the Islam out of the Apostate Prophet.
Absolutely, yeah.
Lovely. So yeah, I do appreciate you rushing back, and I promise folks that the only grape that is going to appear in this conversation is the one that is in my glass. There'll be no serfdom hand appearing off screen to dangle it like someone's getting teabagged. You know, none of that will happen today. And hopefully,
that's boring. But that's why I came here.
Oh, bless! No. I would like to have an intelligent conversation with you, as opposed to that debacle that happened with Ali Needs Dawa.
Have you watched that? Like,
no, I couldn't. It was just so cringe. It was just unbelievably cringy. I couldn't bring myself to watch it. It was just embarrassing. I actually felt sorry for him.
Yeah,
I really did. It's kind of like, what is his ego problem that he needs to behave in such a way? Like,
well, what was so fascinating to me is that all the time, the entire time, he thought he was doing the right thing, and there were people around him helping him, and they were also helping him, thinking that they are doing the right thing, and nobody came up with the idea, wait a minute, dude, this looks very terrible on screen. Let's stop this. Right. Nobody made an intervention. But
gosh, yeah. Mohammed he crouches really failed on that one. You know. So we're going to have the kind of conversation that you should have had with Ali D, and you know, it's not a debate, and I'm not coming at it with a debate. I've done zero prep for this conversation. Same. I don't know. Good. We're on the same page then. And you know, it for me, what I'd be more interested in is just to gain your thoughts and your insights on a number of different things, and you know, to do a bit of backward and forward on stuff. You know, and to have an erudite, elusive, and illuminating conversation with no sort of desire to score points or to win sides of an argument. Mm-hmm. You know, that's certainly the spirit with which I'm coming into this, and you know, you seem like a good bloke, so I trust you know that you'll come with something similar.
I pretend that I come in peace, but actually I'm secretly trying to, you know, get you. Yeah. No, seriously. It's like in our time, that's it's not just in our time, it's in general. People are often driven to somehow make a public impression and to, you know, be correct and prove the other side wrong and to get reactions for that. And the internet is really a suitable environment for just that, because you get live reactions, and that makes you that makes your brain go happy. But it's really sad. I mean, I would really be happy to sit down and have an honest conversation where we talk about our thoughts and tell each other where I think you are wrong and where you think I'm wrong, and so on.
Yeah,
so
and unlike, because when I announced that first time, I announced that I was going to have a conversation with you, I had some Muslim trolls on Twitter going, "Oh, look at you! You're going to share a platform with Apostate Prophet. Oh, look at you! It's kind of like atheists and Christians getting together. Like, what's going on?" And it's like, you know, because my religion doesn't teach me to hate my enemies, ideological enemies. You know, it's kind of like there's a very clear distinction in my mind between the dignity that you have as a human being versus your completely baffling worldview, which, you know, it's kind of like these two things are not the same thing. And I can relate to you as a human being.
I appreciate it.
Whilst demonstrating that, you're wrong, you know. Yeah. Anyway, joking aside, I thought we should probably start off on the thing that we'll agree about the most, you know, and just start talking a bit about science. Have you studied science at all, or is it just sort of like
study science?
Like, have you gone into a further education in which science was the topic?
Well, I have taken undergrad classes, the most basic ones. I think the only field that I went into more advanced of an analysis or an education of science is where I took psychology classes and neuropsychology and neuroscience classes. So as part of that, primarily the brain, the nervous system, and how it interacts with the body. That's very much the science that I took. Anything else was just on the basic level. Aside from that, I didn't take it professionally, academically, or anything else. I just looked into scientific stuff in my free time, relevant to things that I think about, relevant to the beliefs that we are talking about, and so on. So I have a little bit of knowledge, but I wouldn't say that I'm like extremely qualified to make judgments about what is scientifically true and what is not.
Right. So when I was at uni, they ran they were trying to basically, at my university, not enough people wanted to do physics, so the physics department ran a physics course for art students, and to not intimidate them, they took all the maths out of it. But then we studied the sort of the concepts of science just without the mathematics. I don't think it succeeded in recruiting many people over from the arts, but I found it absolutely fascinating, and I've kind of maintained an interest in physics since then, even though I didn't go on to study it as a main subject.
I think physics is very scary to many people, right? It's like to the general population, it is either scary or boring. Detestable almost.
A little harsh. It's the maths. It's the maths. Like people don't like the mathematics. It's the mathematics that sort of intimidates them, and I don't blame them. Like, I tried doing A-level maths, and it was just like, no, this is just too much, right?
It's like when I tried really hard, I was extremely good in maths in high school, but beyond that, I would never voluntarily take a maths class or a physics class. I don't care, and that's not my field. I would rather be busy with different things. When it comes to physics, I would not want to take a physics class at all, not even with the thought of, maybe it will add some things that will be useful to what I'm doing. No, I just don't want to do it. I am curious about things, I'll look them up.
Were you a Muslim at this time? Like,
yeah,
just out of interest. I mean, I don't know your story of how you sort of freed your mind from that nonsense, but like, what was it that, like, how old were you when you left Islam? Just out of interest.
How old was I when I left Islam? I believe I was 23 years old when I told myself that I left Islam. I know very well that it was a moment that I spoke it out. I had to do that. I had to take a moment and tell myself, I am no longer a Muslim. I don't believe in Allah anymore. I don't believe in Islam anymore. I had to do that. It was a very long phase of losing faith and realizing, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. But in the end, I arrived at a certain point where I was then convinced in my mind, and then I told myself, I'm no longer a Muslim. That was 23 years of age, and it took another year to start identifying with an atheist mindset. And I thought, I just don't think that there is a God. But it still took several years to wrestle with certain religions and religious beliefs. And only many years later did I come to the conclusion, okay, I certainly do not believe in God.
Yeah. And did science play a role in your deconversion, or did it play a role in the sort of cementing of your atheism, or did it play a role in, what role did science play in that?
Science played a huge role in leaving Islam, because I read the Quran several times.
That's a dangerous thing.
Yeah, that's the funny thing. Like, I was just raised as a Muslim in a very religious family without having much of an Islamic education myself as a young boy and a youth. And at some point, I started taking my religion very seriously. And then I sat down and read the Quran. And with everything that I learned about the world, about how the world functions, reading the Quran was just very strange. And I didn't want to think much about it. I read it repeatedly, and there were constantly these things, like these doubts that were bugging me, and about how the Quran describes the sky or the sun or stars and all that, and it just seemed very primitive and very bad. But all I wanted to do was, I remember a certain moment where I was fasting on a hot day in Ramadan and walking through the street and being really like oppressed. It feel like I can feel it. I'm being pushed by certain doubts about the things that I read in the Quran about the natural world, but I'm just trying to push them away, thinking, hey, I'm just a worthless little human individual. I don't understand it. It's not up to me, But eventually those things became a huge problem, and I think they played a major role in leaving Islam.
Funnily enough, not yesterday, but on Sunday, I was speaking to a Muslim that had come to a church that I was attending. And he's considering leaving Islam. He's there because, he's been befriended by Christians. He's got his doubts about Islam, and he's pointing out all the he's pointing out to me all the sort of issues, contradictions. So, they are there to be seen if people look. But I often think that the atheistic community, and this is my opinion, and I'd love to hear what you've got to say about this, but that the atheistic community, as much as sort of fundamentalist Christians as well, abuse science and try to make science say and speak into things that are beyond its descriptive scope.
Yeah, there was a phase when I left Islam that I started hanging out online in the atheist community among memers and other people, and on a less intellectually advanced level, I would say, until I sat down and started reading the works of certain contemporary, experts on certain scientific matters, where I saw a pattern of people having this thought, this idea that we accept science as an authority. We don't accept superstition. Science rules, science over everything, and all that. And you could say that often people just kind of use it as a flag or a slogan, or their symbol to on a fight against being indoctrinated by certain religions. And often people do not really go very deeply into what the science actually is and how it really contradicts with religious teachings. That is true. That said, I would say nowadays, when I refer to science, for example, and how certain religious beliefs contradict with science, or how science is a better explanation, what I mean is that I'm not looking at science as like I would say as a set of doctrines, or as an entity or a religious belief or whatever it is. Science is merely how humans explain the natural world around them. So when I say that something within a religion is in contradiction with science, what I'm saying is that the certain thing in religion is contradictory with how we explain something in the natural world by proper observations. And
I
Islam is
think,
on
go
that
on,
level
sorry.
very wrong. Islam is just on that level, for example, very wrong. And you could say the same about other religions, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, like when the Quran says that, God has spread out the earth like a bed or like a carpet, unless beds and carpets are suddenly identifying as balls, then, it's kind of like, that's an obvious statement that it's flat. But that in and of itself wouldn't be a problem. It's the fact that the Quran also states that you can't find any errors in it. Do you know what I'm saying? It's that creates the problem. If you took that verse out, then you could explain away some of these, so-called scientific problems as literary devices, metaphors. Because certainly as a Christian, I'm not in the sort of literalist camp, which tends to be the noisy camp amongst the Christians, but and they are my brothers and sisters. I'm not saying that they're not Christians, but it tends to be the noisy camp amongst the Christians. I believe in evolution. I believe in the Big Bang. I believe in the scientific method. I accept science as its own school of thought, and that it has explanatory power connected to the material world and the causes within the material world. But it's precisely because I have an appreciation of science that I don't think that it has anything to say about miracles, the supernatural, metaphysics, or God.
Wait, you do believe in the evolution of species?
Yes. Yeah, I
do?
believe in evolutionary species. Yeah, of course.
I see.
But my point is that but science proper can't speak into metaphysics, and can't speak into discourse about God, and can't speak into miracles. And so when I hear atheists say or use science to try and say, therefore, God does not exist, what I'm hearing is the mirror image of Christians who try to use science to prove that you should believe in the Bible. And
Yeah,
I think both sides are actually abusing science in this regard.
I understand. There is a very interesting contrast between that perspective, which I see quite often within within the Christian community, and the Islamic perspective, which is the Islamic perspective is very much that everything has been made clear in the Quran. It describes things as they are for a fact, and if those things are in contradiction with with certain theories that humans have come up with, then the human theories, such as certain speculations about evolution, for example, are of course not true, because the Quran makes factual statements about the natural world and about living beings and species and how everything works. I guess within Christianity, you have more room for interpretation.
Well, we also have more room for different schools of thinking.
Hmm.
So, there is a reason why, despite the fact that China was a far more advanced technological civilization than Western Europe, there is a reason why modern science grew out of a Christian milieu as opposed to the Confucius milieu of China, because the Confucius milieu of China emphasized and doubled down on autocracy and authority and tradition, whereas the Christian worldview believed that the human soul needs to draw near to God, and that there were many spiritualities by which you could do that, and that the natural philosophers believed in a rational God who created a rational universe, and thus by rational inquiry into the natural world you could think God's thoughts after him and draw closer to him. And that was the milieu, the context in which the modern scientific age was able to be born. And then you've got these clashes that the Enlightenment jumped upon, and made a big fuss about nothing. Well, not a fuss about nothing, but they made it into a much bigger issue than it actually was. Like Galileo Galilei and the Catholic Church, ignoring the fact
Yeah.
it's kind of like the study of the cosmos. That you couldn't have had the controversy if the church had forbidden the study of the cosmos.
Yeah.
It was just that on a couple of key points, the study of the cosmos led to the upending of a universally accepted norm that was accepted for good scientific reasons at the time.
Hmm. Hmm.
You know,
There is a thing. I mean, in Christian history, especially after the establishment of Catholicism, or even prior to that, the spread of Christianity into the Western world, into the Roman Empire and its many different, into the entire realm of the Roman Empire, you could argue that people were overtaken by this idea that they have spent their whole lives or centuries in vain just doing worldly things for pleasure or for other things, but now they have found the truth, which is Christianity, which is following Jesus and worshiping God, and they are supposed to put a stop to these merely purely pleasurable things, or purely intellectual things, and that they should rather direct their attention towards their newfound Christian beliefs and should worship God. And it could be argued that the Catholic Church had a major impact in turning that into the major idea within Western Christianity, that
yeah.
people should not waste their times with worldly things and with exploring certain questions, but that they should rather just be good Christians and defend their Christian realms and worship God.
Well, I think, I don't want to get too quickly off science for the moment, if you'll forgive me, because
Sure, sure.
I want to try and stay on the proper understanding and proper use of science. But the certainly, Christians do attribute value to certain activities over other activities. But the Catholic civilization that was built in Europe was incredible, and gave rise to the Enlightenment, and gave rise to the Reformation, and gave rise to the modern world. Without that base that is Catholic Western Europe, Latin Europe, you wouldn't have the modern world, because it was those foundations that set up the next phase, and then the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis, and so on. But my point is that I think that the militant scientific community is abusing science when they bring it into questions about God.
Okay.
And I was wondering what is your view to that question? Because I would argue that when an atheist, any atheist, appeals to science as a way of arguing on the existence of God, they've actually abused science, because science wouldn't be able to talk into that topic.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, as far as I see it, this is a rather complicated question, or a complicated topic to talk about.
The kind of question you never got to do with Mr. Grapes.
There are many different perspectives coming from many different individuals and organizations and movements within the scientific community, or atheists, or new atheists, for example, when it comes to how they use science when arguing about God, or how they use God when arguing about science. And there are certainly people who would say that God is, of course, out of the question, because it was an explanation in the past which contradicts with the findings and observations that we have right now. The findings and observations we have now point toward a completely non-theistic origin and development of the universe, and we should use this, we should amplify this in order to get rid of religious interpretation of the history of the universe, because that will help find out more about what the universe actually looks like, and how it formed. But people are motivated by this idea that holding certain religious beliefs actually holds us back and prevents us from properly, honestly, and without bias analyzing the true nature of the natural world around us. And I guess many people could say that that we have evidence for this from the fact that new scientific findings have in the past conflicted with religious beliefs, and were therefore punished or faced with criticism or severe reactions or rejection by religious communities.
If I may jump in on that, because
Sure.
I think that's swerving the question. The question is not whether religion helps or hinders knowledge. And the question isn't whether we can explain the invention of God, as a way of explaining things in the past. The question was not about those two things. The question was about whether science can speak into the supernatural.
I see.
So that's the question. And I would argue firstly that, it's a nice theory to say that God was the explanatory theorem that was used in the past, and has been replaced by a more powerful empirical material epistemology. But that doesn't that's actually irrelevant to the question. I see. And also, the thing is, all the atheists that abuse science in this way, they seem to forget that Galileo Galilei and Copernicus were both practicing Christians.
Of course.
Many of the
respected scientists were Christians.
Multiple thousands of advances in what we would call science have been done by Christians. And it's simply that the atheist community wants to telescope in history on those Christians that raged against science, as if those Christians represent all Christians, rather than the Galileo Galileis and the Copernicus and saying that Galileo Galilei and Copernicus don't represent Christians.
Yeah.
And,
No,
that's an abuse of history. But
of
I
course,
want
of
you to
course.
answer the question that I asked.
I know.
So
Here's the thing. Here's why I'm answering in that way. I see your point, and I want to get to the actual question that we're talking about. The thing is, I usually feel like I can't really answer for the specific atheists that you are talking about.
I'm not asking you to.
I know. I'm saying I usually don't have that approach. Usually don't have that perspective. But if you asked me, and I see where you think we kind of went off track here. If you ask me, I would say that science can answer certain questions about supernatural claims made in the past and made today. It has the capability of answering certain questions. It can, of course, not answer certain questions about whether behind everything that we have discovered there is actually a creator or not. That's it's impossible to falsify that. It's impossible to prove or disprove that. But I think what's important is if you gave an example of an abuse of science in order to disprove God or in order to counter religion, what example would you be thinking of?
Well, it's not. It's these generic appeals that the atheist community seems to make, in which they assume, in a rather absurd way, that the whole of life and the whole of our existence can be reduced down to simply material cause and effect. When anyone who's just fair-minded will realize that, as well as living in a very material world that has very clear laws, observable, repeatable laws, there's also the fact that we do live by metaphysical realities. We live by meaning.
Okay.
We live by truth. We live by
Here's how I would
faithfulness.
say
We
it.
live by hope. And these are
Here-
metaphysics. You can't bottle them. You can't test them, and you can't falsify them.
Here's how I would answer the question. I would say, for me, scientific findings, what I follow in science, and what I am given within the realm of scientific explanations, I would say science explains to us very well the history of the universe and of many things within our universe, the nature of it, and you could depart from science and say, okay, behind all of this there is a creator, and I believe in this creator based on arguments A, B, and C. You could say that. To me, science itself does not necessarily prove or disprove the existence of God. It explains
Brilliant.
many things, many questions that we have. Aside from that, I would have to have different reasons for why God is not real, or for why there is no divine creator or originator behind things. And to me, science is not the reason why I don't believe in God, for example. I would say,
Right, yeah.
with the Big Bang, and with the several theories that we have of what happened exactly before the Big Bang, we still cannot at the current moment have a very certain explanation, a very certain non-theistic explanation that we can consider definitely true. It is simply impossible to do that, to attain that knowledge. So I will say we have certain scientific explanations for the universe and for how the universe works and how it began and how it expanded and developed. Aside from that, whether there is a God behind all of this or not is a question that we cannot answer with science.
I agree, and that's my point.
Mhm.
I think it's a dishonest discourse when atheists, and they've been doing it since the Enlightenment. Anti-Christians have been doing it since the Enlightenment, and then Christians, when, for instance, when the theory of evolution came onto the stage, there were essentially two reactions. A minority of Christians went, "Yep, okay, that's what the science says, so let's go with it," and they found a place for it in theology, and all those Christians have been forgotten. But at the time of Charles Darwin, there were Christians that were quite happy to go along with the theory of evolution, no problem. But history wants to set up this false dichotomy of the conflict between religion and science. So all it does is it looks for the friction points. It never looks for the synergies. It looks for the oppositions. It never looks for the alliances. And if we were to write a real history of science and religion, it would actually demonstrate conclusively that Christians, have been very pro-science.
Here's the
just that we
thing, though.
stumbled on certain, we balked on certain things,
Mhm.
But the point that I think that we've agreed upon is that science can't say that God doesn't exist, and therefore your reasons for saying God doesn't exist have to be other than scientific.
Yes,
And equally true, I would never say that science can prove God. My reasons for believing in God are something other than scientific reasons.
I agree fundamentally. Here is the issue. There is one problem with all of this. Now, I can say no matter what we find through science, it could still be that there is, a divine creator or originator or multiple of them behind all of this. It doesn't matter what we find. Anything that we find can still have a divine originator behind it. I agree completely on that. We cannot disprove God through science. Here is the issue. The thing that people have done, in the last centuries and also do today to a certain extent, is they look at this never ending idea of the God of the gaps. And they say, in the past, we have explained certain things about the natural world through God or through religious explanations. And we find those explanations not only within the minds, not only on the minds and within the writings of religious people, we also find that they are written within fundamental scriptures. And those were only explanations which people had because they did not understand the natural world. But today, we have made certain observations and came to certain findings which show to us that all of those explanations are actually wrong and that they were merely an ignorant attempt at understanding the world. So, therefore, we see that those explanations are vastly wrong and we have natural explanations for this. Therefore, why not also go further and and analyze the whole idea of God, because it seems like God is something that, just like that, was also merely created in our minds or by our past seekers who were genuine on their pursuit for truth, in order to explain things they didn't understand. But now we have science.
Yeah. So I would counter and say that the people that make that kind of argument are fallen into the fallacy of projecting into the past modern attitudes. So, for example, the first 5 books of Moses were not given as a way of explaining the world. They were given as a way of explaining the origins of Israel.
Mhm.
So it wasn't about, the books of Moses being written to explain how the world works, because the people in that age didn't care. What they cared about was completely different to us. What they cared about was their origin story, and the Exodus is
Yeah.
their origin story. So, but before you tell the Exodus, you've got to tell, how did the people get into Egypt in the first place? So the first 5 books of Moses are talking about the origin story of a people, which is what they actually cared about. It was not about explaining how the world works. And so people that make the kind of suggestion that you've just made are demonstrating their unconscious and lack of awareness to the fact that they are taking modern concerns and projecting them onto people in the past.
Here's the thing. I would say, and many others would say, that you have this response because of your specific Christian perspective on why these things were written and said in your scripture. Uh, Throughout Christian history, authorities and others have believed that these are genuine explanations of how the world around us works and functions. If you start reading Genesis, I read Genesis. I started reading Genesis before I left Islam, and
Well done.
I thought this is not a better explanation to the natural world than I found in the Quran. Not saying the Quran is better. I was hoping for something better, but I didn't find it here, because I mean, when you start with it, you start with a very rudimentary explanation of how the world around you functions, is what I would argue back then, and would still argue to a certain extent. It starts with there was only God, and his spirit was above the waters, and he made light, he made the earth, he made this and that. And these seem to be indeed explanations of the world, not only of a specific part of the world. And those explanations seem to be in line with ancient understandings of how the universe we have came into existence, ancient cosmology that you can find in pre-Jewish times in Sumeria, for example. And people would argue that those are genuine observations about the world, and that science disproves those observations, which is why we should also ask the question, what about God? Maybe God is another such explanation that people only made because they didn't know better.
And I do want to come to the question of God. There's no getting around it. I mean, that's why we're here, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I just want to say, this is how a conversation should occur. It's not about point scoring. It should be about genuine sharing of ideas in mutual respect.
Where are my grapes?
Yeah, where are your grapes, man? Where's the wife? Where's that servant wife with the hand just to teabag you with the grapes? It's kind of like that poor woman. I wonder. I don't know how she felt about being a prop, but
I thought it was actually a man whose hands looked like the hands of a woman. So
do you reckon?
It's extra funny.
Do you reckon it's definitely not he crouches? That's for sure. So my point to you is that so just coming back to this thesis, because I'm saying to you that you read Genesis wrong if you read Genesis thinking that Genesis was offering an explanation of the world. And the reason, let me give you some literary evidence to that fact. The focal point of the whole Genesis story is obviously the Exodus. And and what you see again and again through the 5 books of Moses are genealogies. This guy begat this guy, and this guy begat that guy, and that guy begat that guy, and that guy begat that guy, and this guy's your father, and this guy's your grandfather, and this guy's your great grandfather, and this guy's your great 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 grandfather, and it goes on. Whenever Christians are doing these in liturgical readings and they get one of these lists, it's just like, oh no, they've got to read through and begat, and he begat, and he begat. Now, why give those lists of genealogies unless the concern is the origin of where you came from?
I agree.
So my point to you is that when people criticize Genesis and when people criticize the Old Testament, saying, the Old Testament was trying to explain the world and it got it wrong because science proves that it got it wrong, they've actually misunderstood the literature. The literature is talking about the origins of Israel, and it's telling the story of Israel. It's not trying to explain the world in the way that we moderns want it to. It's telling how Israel came to be. And what's the place of Israel in the world, and what's the purpose of Israel, and what's Israel's relationship to Israel's God. So it's a failure to understand and to appreciate the narrative in the Old Testament if you look at it and say, I'm about to get an explanation that explains how the world works.
Okay, here's the thing. I agree with your idea that it was their intention to explain the origins of themselves. I disagree, however, that is what they actually did. If you look at the traditional Jewish understanding of the Bible, correct me if I'm wrong, their understanding of it is that it actually explains to them, the creation and the world, which is why they also put an age to the earth, to the beginning of history, to the beginning of things, in their traditional understanding of how to interpret the Hebrew Bible. So they did attempt to explain their own history, But what they also did was to explain themselves as a fundamental beginning part of this history, where they said, okay, God, there was nothing, there was only God. Then God created this, then God created that, then God created that, and then God created the first human, and from that human all the others came forth. So they are actually putting forth an explanation of the history, the beginning and the history of the world that we live in. You might say that that's not what they are trying to do, and I've heard this explanation before, and I could even understand that Christian scripture could be interpreted in this way. But the question that I then ask myself is, isn't the Bible meant to be, planned and inspired by God as a scripture serving to be read at all times by those who believe in God? And when they start reading this book and read what is on a plain reading, a misunderstanding of our natural world, doesn't that make people doubt their beliefs?
So let me come to that, because this kind of fundamentalist, literalist reading of scripture emerged as the Bible became commonly available, and it emerged almost in reaction to the Enlightenment militants' use of science to attack Christianity. And that created a reaction of some Christians doubling down on the literal defense of Scripture. And both of those groups in history, and that occurred from the 1700 onwards, both of those groups abuse Scripture, because the literary that we're talking about is an origin story of Israel. And the reason why the Genesis story is included is because Adam and Eve are presented as God's priests on earth. And in the books of Exodus and Leviticus, the people of Israel are sworn into a covenant to be God's priests on earth. So it's this idea that God is establishing a nation that will live out the original design, the original intention of humanity amongst the Gentiles.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why you've got the Adam and Eve story. It's not meant as I mean, it may have well have been read, and it may well have been understood by people in a mythological age, literally,
Mm-hmm.
but it was written to describe the role that human beings are meant to have on earth, and therefore the role that Israel was meant to have in the Old Covenant, to be God's priests on earth, which is incidentally what the church is meant to be in the New Covenant, God's priests on earth.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this continuity of a theme that when science comes along and erodes any possibility of a literal interpretation of Genesis, the theological interpretation of Genesis still stands. So it stood at the time of Israel, and it stands 2,000 years today. I consider myself a priest of God, Yahweh on earth. And just as Moses and the people around Moses would have considered themselves as God's priests on earth.
Can I ask you a
the
question?
Theological interpretation has resisted and has stood. And that's the point, is that you've got to read the Old Testament firstly as theology,
Mm-hmm.
not as science, because
That's how
when
I
you
did.
do that,
That's
you're
how I did later
misreading
on.
the Bible.
That's how I did. How I did it later on, when I gave it a second try and thought I shouldn't be reading it with the intention of finding a better explanation of reality. I should just read it to understand the theology behind it and the history of how things are. I was also motivated by the fact that Islam severely distorts biblical scripture, so I wanted to
Massively.
see the
Massively.
reality of it.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a quick question to understand
Yeah,
your
of course.
perspective. When it comes to evolution, for example, I see that is in contradiction with fundamental understandings and interpretations of the scripture, or fundamentalist interpretations of the scripture, as you would agree. How do you view it? Do you think that humans, among other species, actually developed from more primitive life forms?
Yes.
You do. Okay. And how do you exactly fit the narrative of creation into this? At what point did God start
sure,
communicating with people and making them an
because
agent?
because the Genesis story is more telling about the dignity of man and about his purpose in the world. It's given him a purpose in the world, which is to care and to cultivate the garden that God placed him on, i.e., the planet, and to live holy before him as his priests in relationship to him, as the crowning of his creation. And so it's more talking about the meaning of man's existence as opposed to the origins of man's existence. But the origin is obviously, for me as a Christian, I obviously believe that is God, but I don't think that Genesis is describing an actual physical history of the world in a scientific way. Though I do think that, there's some beautiful synergies between the Genesis account, which is a poem. Genesis 1 is written as a poem. I think that might include Genesis 2, but I'm not 100% sure. But, there are some beautiful synergies between the observations in Genesis and later scientific discoveries, such as, for instance, the fact, the idea that all the earth was in one place, because it says in Genesis that all the waters shall be gathered unto one place so that dry land might appear. Well, if all the water's in one place, where's all the land? In another place. It says that there's light before the sun. Now, as someone who has studied physics, I can absolutely tell you that as the collapsing dust cloud that then becomes our sun heats up to the point that it can carry out nuclear fusion, it will have given off light. So that, the Bible is correct in saying that there was light before the sun. The Bible has another beautiful synergy that it talks about life starting in the oceans before it appears on the land. You
could say that Muslims argue the same thing about the Quran.
Yeah. But the thing is, I'm not trying to present Genesis as being a scientific text.
Okay.
I'm just saying that these are beautiful synergies. I'm just saying that they are wondrous kind of happy accidents, let's call it. Where...
How about when Genesis says, for example, that when Genesis describes, as far as I remember it, the waters above the firmament and below the firmament. How do you understand that, for example?
So, I mean, it's the fact that, if you go high enough, there's ice particles all the way into the stratosphere, frozen ice, frozen particles of ice. It's just that. It's not, but I mean, for me, what I don't do is I don't read Genesis trying to find the science.
Okay, here's the thing, though. I mean, you did that. That's how you see it, and I appreciate that. But you do understand how somebody who reads it critically or who reads it with a different understanding reads it and thinks that is rather a primitive interpretation of how the world around us looks, a primitive observation made, I don't know, 3,000, 4,000 years ago.
So let me ask you this. If someone came to you and tried to argue that Lord of the Rings by J.R. Tolkien was history, what would you say to them?
Well, I would say it's obviously not, because it's obviously very clearly fiction, but that's not true for
what you would do is,
right?
So what you would do is you would argue that you should understand the literature you're reading before you try to, you've got to understand the intention of the literature you're reading, correct?
But it's different, because in this case, I do for a fact know that it is meant to be a work of fiction, whereas the Bible is not meant to be a work of,
But something that isn't. But the point is, the literature that you're reading in the Old Testament is theology.
Okay.
First and foremost, it's theology. It needs to be understood as theology, and it's written to a group of people who lived in the times of myth. The way that a people would capture their values and beliefs is through mythological story, through mythological narrative. That doesn't mean that it's false.
Sure, but here's the thing. No, I'm not. I'm just being the devil's advocate right now.
You're always the devil's advocate, Apostate Prophet. Always. You're always on the side of the devil.
What I'm saying, You are right. That is how you could
Did you hear
view
that,
it.
people? He said I was right. I win.
That is how you could view it. But others, for example, I had a I don't want to speak for him now, but I recently had a conversation with a an expert in sumerology and all that. In his perspective, for example, these were actually meant to be explanations of the natural world around us, like many other works of scripture of mythical or religious importance back then. People were indeed trying to explain the world around us and merely presented certain explanations of the cosmos that are parallel to other contemporary explanations of the cosmos that now turn out to be false because we have better findings. So
Again,
they would say
Apostate,
that was their intention. You say
I would
this
say
is their
those
intention.
people are projecting into the past their own concerns. The people to whom the literature of the Old Testament were written were not concerned about explaining how the world worked. What they were concerned about was explaining their own origin story and the meaning of their own nation's existence, their own
Okay.
people's existence.
So I
And
want to ask you something for consistency. When we're talking about the Sumerians, for example, we have surviving, texts which explain to us certain stories that are nowadays known, where they explain that certain gods created humans as agents on this land that they created specifically just for them, and there were a few different gods, but humans quickly became too many, were too noisy and too arrogant and all of that, which is why one of the gods was like, hey, you know what, let's get rid of these people. So they tried to get rid of those people, but then another god tried to intervene and used the waters to protect humans from going extinct and so on. And this is how they indeed created a creation myth as it is known nowadays. Would you argue that in their case, they certainly did not have the intention of explaining the origins and the history of the universe, but that they were just trying to make a theological point?
To be honest, Apostate Prophet, I'd have to read the literature. I don't know. I'd have to look at what the literature is,
Okay.
and see what it's saying before I could pass comment. I mean, you're giving me an example, and I appreciate you've given me a summary of it, but I would have to look.
A very bad summary. It's
yeah. So I can't comment on something that I've not read.
It's Enlil, and Ea is the god who tries to help humans. Maybe if you can look into it and could tell me what you think about that.
Yeah, we could. I hope regardless of how this conversation pans out, because we still got nearly 60 minutes to offend one another grotesquely, but I hope we'll keep up a conversation and a dialogue off screen. I want to try and move the conversation forward, because
definitely.
I want to come on to sort of metaphysics. Do you agree that?
No.
Let me give you my definition. I would define metaphysics as realities that we live our lives by that aren't material. So I just, they're realities that really impact our lives, that we really live our lives by, but you can't bottle them, you can't falsify them, you couldn't put them in a lab and experiment upon them, but yet they are truly real.
I don't know how to argue with that. What I understand from metaphysics is only the field of study which analyzes the nature or the essence of existence around us. And you could go into this and just define metaphysics as something beyond physics, which you can not necessarily verify with with your human senses and observations. But that is not really the unanimous understanding of it, is it? And metaphysics is also just merely a field of thought where people try to understand the nature of existence. And I would say that claims about a certain incomprehensible nature which is, beyond our understanding and beyond our senses, is something that I cannot really argue about because it is unfalsifiable. But in terms of understanding the verifiable essence of existence itself, that is something that is worth pursuing. I don't know if I've answered your question or if I've just made a mess out of it, but
No. It's not about gotcha moments. That's not what this is about. I mean, that's what Ali Needs Dower might have been after.
Yeah.
I'm more interested in just an honest conversation with a nice fella. So I would say that let's approach the question from another way.
Okay.
I believe you're married. Is that right?
Yeah.
And do you love your wife?
Yeah.
Is your love a real thing that really impacts your life? And would you agree that love could never be bottled, could never be stuck in a lab, could never be falsified, and could never be examined?
Well, here is the problem. That is where we have a problem. See,
I like
as
problems.
a student and geek of psychology and neuropsychology, I would argue that you could define love as something entirely immaterial. But I would say the immaterial aspect of it is only how we describe love as it is manifested in a society. But if you actually look at the human and how the human functions, we can attribute love to biological functions within a human being. If you remove certain parts of a human's brain, he will not be able to feel love anymore. If you put a person into a situation and face them with something that they love very much, you will be able to observe activities, patterns within the brain that you can observe over and over and over again, which is why it is scientifically verifiable that is what we call love or affection, or whatever you want to call it.
Hold on, because I forgive me for taking. I kind of assumed that you'd go down that road. And I agree. We can identify the parts of the brain that become active when someone meditates and reflects upon their beloved. The guy that wrote Song of Solomon would have been, had all those parts of the brain really generating as he contemplated his beloved wife, and vice versa. But observing which part of the brain is connected to the sensation of love is not the same as the love itself. The love itself is the meaning of the sensation. The love itself is the exuberance of that particular connection between A and B person. It's something that you cannot stick in a bottle. But I mean, do you agree at least with that?
No, you can't stick it in a bottle because it doesn't exist. Because it's not. No, you can't put it in a bottle because it doesn't exist.
Right, but do you believe your love exists?
I do believe.
Does your love to you? Because if you're sat there saying love doesn't exist, you must be at Valentine's Day.
No.
When you're sat across from your wife and you go, "My love for you does not exist."
No, because
but I bought you flowers and we're having a meal.
Because I would say that what we call love, what you describe as love, what I describe as love when I feel love, is my interpretation of the sensations that are happening within my nervous system and my brain, my body. Something happens to me as I am close to my wife, or when I see something that I love, as we call it, and I call that love. So I interpret it. I interpret that as love, which is why it doesn't really exist and you can't put it in a bottle. But what I interpret as love is merely what I feel as a result of these certain activities and sensations that happen within my body.
But I would say that is a real thing. That's none of the. If you were to break down those sensations, like, oh, I've got my belly's turning over and it's turning to jelly when I'm around you, and like my head goes foggy when I see you, and oh, I just want to be close to you, and like those. If you were to break all of those things down, none of them in and of themselves could be called love.
Sure, I exactly.
But
But it's only the way we
the
interpret what
orchestra,
all of that does
but
together.
the orchestra of them is a very real thing that has very real impacts on your life.
Of course, of course.
Right. So it's connected to, obviously it's connected to consciousness, itself a bit of a mystery, but it is but it's also connected to meaning, because your love for your wife gives meaning to your life.
Yeah.
Now that things like meaning and things like the love that you have for your wife are not material things.
Mm-hmm.
They're above physics.
Yeah.
They're outside of physics.
Yeah.
So you can't reduce those experiences down to their physical properties.
I agree to a certain
There you go.
extent.
You
To
agreed.
a certain extent, but will you now connect this to God, or what will you do
I'm
with
getting
it?
there. I'm getting there.
Because then I will point out that is not the right comparison to make. But if you want to go on and go,
we're not comparing it to God. We're not comparing it to God just yet.
Okay.
But do you agree that therefore it is a fair statement to say that we have realities, real things, realities that are outside of empirical observation, that are outside of falsification?
You have to think that through, but there is the thing again. When you talk about realities, I merely say it is my cognitive, conscious interpretation of certain things that are happening. It's not actually something that exists. I am just giving a name to it because my brain activates certain chemicals, something happens, and the result of all that, what I feel in my body, I call that love. And when I say to my wife, I love you, what I'm saying is I feel those things when I am connected to you. That's what I'm actually saying.
Not me.
It's not like I'm referring to something that's it's kind of comparable to the concept of justice. For example, justice is not something that exists. It's not real. It is not. It's not out there. You cannot touch it. What you call justice is a human understanding, a human interpretation of the right thing and the wrong thing to do, and the application thereof as a result of your understanding of morality, establishing a code of law, and creating certain rules, applying punishments and rewards. You call that justice as a whole. Justice itself is not something that really exists. It's a concept.
My question to you is, is there such a thing
as a concept? It exists, yes, subjectively.
Right. But if
in the case of love, it exists as a concept, as our interpretation of the collective of things that go on in our body.
I would argue. Let's sort of like collect all of these things together and put them into the term meaning. Because justice is a form of meaning, love is a form of meaning, hope is a form of meaning, faith is a form of meaning. Do you think that meaning is a real thing?
Again, it's quite similar to that, depending on meaning as we perceive it, is a real thing insofar that you say, hey, I exist in this world, I have certain ambitions, and I want to live for those ambitions, and you can call that meaning.
But isn't that real?
Yeah, I mean, in your brain, in your mind, it is, yes.
Right. So it's a real thing.
In your mind, yes.
Right. So, but the point is, it's the thing is that you can't reduce it to simply the material, because you can't point.
Sure. Yeah.
You can't point to a chemical that is activated. Let's go back to love, because that's one that we can. You can't point to a chemical and go, this chemical is love, because if you stuck it in a bottle, no one would look at the bottle and say, oh yes, love.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Sure, yeah.
the reason why is because love is a connection between two souls. It's a
Yeah.
connection between two people. You know, and even if through magnets, some powerful magnets, you could induce some sensation of euphoria, which of course you can manipulate the brain through, you know, magnets and stuff like that. No one would
A very
attach.
small objection that I want to make here, a very small thing that I want to point out here. The other person cannot literally feel the love that you feel for that person. Right?
Yes.
You agree to that. So it is completely, it is restrained to your own experience. It does not impact the other person unless you tell them certain things or you physically interact with them in such a way that you stimulate love within them as well. So
Yeah.
love to you is only
Yeah,
restricted to your own
we've all.
consciousness.
I say we've all. I've certainly been in that place of unfrequented, unreturned. Is it unfrequented, unfrequented love? You know, when I've loved someone and then they've, you know, not loved me back. I've been there. But my point is that is a real thing. It can't be reduced to the material.
Sure, yeah.
Right, but it's real.
Depends again on how you define real. I mean,
What I would, what I
yes, okay.
define. So I defined it very clearly at the beginning. I said that metaphysics are real things that are not material.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Ideas are things that are not material. You could
Agreed.
argue. You could argue.
Are ideas real?
Although you could argue that ideas are stored within a brain, or sorry, thoughts are stored within a brain, and if you remove that brain, you will get rid of those thoughts. You will lose those thoughts. But if you put an idea out there and it is on the minds of people, then it exists within a society as
Yeah.
a concept, something that is known. And many people, whether they have it on their minds or not, can then acquire that from others. Sure.
Yeah.
Insofar, it is real as a concept, as an idea. But
Is meaning, love?
sure, yeah.
Like,
In the same sense, these things exist. But the thing is, when we say that they are
do
real,
you agree? Do you agree that these things are not material?
sure, yes.
Right. So we can speak meaningfully then about our existence and about our world and about our lives in a way that is beyond the scope of science to speak into. So
Sure,
there
because
is this.
science has nothing to do with that. Science cannot is in no place to interact with that, because science is not meant to
Exactly.
interact with those things. Yeah.
Brilliant. And that's the point that I'm making, is that there's this whole dimension to existence. There's this whole dimension to reality that is non-material, that we acknowledge, we accept, and we live our lives by it, and our lives are impacted by it in a very meaningful and true way that is outside of the scope of scientific discourse.
Yes, we could have reduced that to this whole discussion to 5 seconds, but yes, we agree on that.
Great, thank you. I'm so glad. I'm so glad. You know, that's kind of like a put down. I was being really nice. You know.
Yeah. So, and where do we get from here now?
We're going somewhere. Don't worry. Because like, and what about language? Would you say that language is a metaphysical thing or a natural material thing?
It's hard for me to define these things. Maybe I need to dig more into into how to define ideas or concepts, or certain teachings that humans have established and come up with. I mean, they exist as ideas. Justice is an idea. Meaning is an idea. All of these things. What was the last thing you asked? Was that meaning?
Whether language
Okay,
is
language.
a
Language is an
metaphysical thing or a physical thing.
Language is an idea because people created certain sounds and letters in order to communicate with each other. Insofar, you could say that's what it is. Not sure how you define such things in terms of nature and physics and metaphysical.
Okay. There's two directions that I'd like to take this conversation. One is further down the route of language, and the other is justice. So I'm not so sure, how we're going to do for time to get through them both.
Okay.
Would you agree with me that so, for instance, right, I would say to you that Islam is injustice. Sharia law is injustice. It's wrong. And it should be opposed by every good person. That people like you should be protected from Sharia law, and that the people that advocate for your killing should be thrown into prison, or should be otherwise hindered for the sake of justice. Now, as an atheist, being true to an atheistic, I would say, absurdo-reductionist perspective, could you agree or disagree with my assumption that there is this actual thing called justice?
I would have to analyze.
Islam is not it.
I would have to break down some of the things that you said, and then explain why I have a different perspective on the whole issue. I would say that there is nothing in the world that is universally, objectively, naturally known to be good or bad in the sense that you have described it. I would not say that anything can be described as morally wrong. So when you say that Islam is, of course, objectively, universally wrong, morally wrong, I would say that you first have to define what you mean by wrong, what you would mean by good people like myself, what you mean by should or should not, because I think that these are merely ideas that don't refer to realities in our world, that they are merely ideas created by humans in order to coexist in functioning societies. Insofar,
I'm happy to take a stab at that.
What?
I'm happy to take a stab at that.
Sure.
I would say that you're created with an innate dignity, and that which is justice is that which allows that innate dignity to be expressed as fully and as widely as possible.
I would disagree
without infringing upon the innate dignity of others.
I would disagree with that. I think that humans come into existence merely as beings that have the capability of learning certain ideas and then functioning with those ideas and living with those ideas, whether they agree with them or not, and can change ideas, learn new things, adopt new perspectives, and can fundamentally change the way they view life and morality. All you do is you come into existence and you survive, you eat and you drink and
Reproduce.
You get rid of those things and you reproduce, which is the main thing that you do in life.
But can you meaningfully then, you and Sam Solomon and that sort of atheistic community, can you meaningfully, because remember, meaning is a reality, meaning is a real thing. Can you meaningfully, from your philosophical perspective, sustain a criticism against Islam?
Yes, I can say what I can say. What I do say is I am not saying that there is something that is morally right or morally wrong, and that Islam is morally wrong. In order to do that, I would first have to explain, why I hold certain things to be morally right and morally wrong, and where exactly these things come from. As far as I see it, they do not come from anywhere. We don't have a morality given to us by nature or prescribed by a being that we can or cannot comprehend. All we have are functioning brains that learn in this world that we live together in. When I look at Islam, I say Islam is destructive. It is harmful. It is contrary to human well-being and to human development, because a human's most natural desire is to live well, to be well. And this is a very old idea, to be well and to flourish in peace. That's what humans essentially want, and they want to achieve that by different means. Islam, I argue, is contrary to that end. And when Islam is adopted by certain people, it violates other people's natural desire to live well and to flourish, which is why I think it is in the best interest of humanity to oppose Islam and to get rid of it, because getting rid of it will result in the well-being and the flourishing of humanity as a whole.
Okay, so I'd like to respond to that, because you use the language of end, you use the language of telos, you use the language of the direction of purpose.
Yeah.
And you appeal to the idea that there are certain natural, innate ends, certain natural, innate purposes. But the reality is that meaning is a metaphysical reality. Telos is a metaphysical reality, but you've rooted them in nature, which means that you have observed yourself and you have bore witness to the fact yourself that nature itself points to an end, that nature itself points to a telos.
Not in the same sense, though.
No, but you have done it, haven't you?
Not really, I would say.
So
because what I'm saying is,
but hold on one second, because your whole criticism, and I didn't interrupt you, so it's my channel. So
go ahead.
You know, so the point is that if you go back and you listen to the last sort of 2 minutes of what you said, you quite naturally appeal to the idea of telos and meaning as the basis by which you could justify sustaining a criticism against Islam. Now, one thing that we both agree on is that the world would be a better place without Islam. But the thing that is relevant to our conversation, rather than this just being who can beat down on Islam harder, which is going to be me, and we can have a competition if you want, you know. But the point is, you have innately appealed to metaphysical realities to justify.
I haven't.
Oh, you did. So what is the end? What is this end piece that you talked about?
What I'm saying is, I'm not saying that is something that is beyond our, something that is beyond a naturally, observable or verifiable reality. I am what I actually mean is that humans, as living beings who are intellectually advanced at the level that we are right now, are capable of certain things. Let me give this as an example. This is what I do in my own mind often. Let's think of an example where you pop into the world, into existence, out of nowhere. There's nothing around you. You just pop into existence in an empty world. And what you experience within a day is that you have a need to eat food and to drink and to, get rid of those, to go to the bathroom. And you see somebody else and you have this desire to come together and to mate, let's say. And within this empty world that you popped in without any explanation at all, you simply exist and try to satisfy your needs to eat and drink and all that, right? And you, as you realize that that is what you do, what you biologically need to do, you find ways in order to satisfy that need on a larger scale for a longer period of time. But then a problem arises at some point. At one point, after a while, other people, other beings pop into existence very close to you, and they have the same needs. But food is very limited. They also want to make use of the same food that you are eating in order to satisfy your own needs. So they also want to collect it and get and satisfy their own needs. But you realize that the food is not enough for both of you. So what you do as a result is you suddenly start getting anxious over the food supply and discussing and eventually fighting about it. Now you either come together and say, okay, we should fight about it and whoever survives gets all the food, or you could say, let's make an agreement and share this food in a certain way so that both of us can satisfy our biological need to survive, which somehow came forth. We have no idea how, right? So that is all there is. if you end up
No, hold on one second.
fighting and killing each other, you will not have that peace, that
No,
well-being.
I think
If
that
you make peace with each other, just a second, if you make peace with each other, you might find a better way in order to satisfy your needs and to also satisfy the needs of your offspring, which you also
Yeah.
then create into this world.
Yeah.
That is not really a meaning that is hidden somewhere. It is merely a reaction to a very real, verifiable fact that you observe in your own nature and in your surrounding. And based on that, I would say humans have a need to be well and to satisfy their own needs. Islam is an idea that believes in slaughtering other people and lying to them and spreading by force and with no regard for their needs. Insofar, I would say Islam is contrary to your well-being. Other ideas are better.
Yeah, that's true, but the point of that, but you're still appealing to metaphysics.
In what sense?
Because in terms of the value that we ascribe to something, values themselves are metaphysical. And what you did there is you ascribed value to needs. Now, I would dispute with you whether you ascribe the right level of value to those physical needs. I would say that you have you've overvalued the fulfillment of physical needs. But nonetheless, you did just another metaphysical thing there. You ascribed a value to something.
Well,
My point to you, no, one
go
second.
ahead. Go ahead.
So my point to you is that the scaffold of the human mind can't escape, cannot escape metaphysics, and that metaphysics is above and beyond any particular material cause that we can identify, like the brain or a chemical in the brain. You know, like the love that you feel for your wife is more than just a chemical or a region in your brain. The value, you know, we can probably identify when we think about values which part of the brain is activated, but the values themselves and the idea of a value system is once again a metaphysical attitude, and once again a metaphysical reality. And the point that I'm getting to it is that if we can accept, and you did earlier in the conversation accept, and I want to try and move it on in the sort of last 30 minutes to the final point, which is about God. If we can accept that there are realities that are not reducible simply to material components, but are realities that are things that genuinely are real and impact our lives, that are outside of simple scientific observation and description, then it opens up the possibility of metaphysical beings that are also outside of our power of scientific description.
Isn't that a little bit of a slippery slope, though? Because I mean, I would say that what you describe as metaphysics, and sure, I mean, we can call it metaphysics. I would say something is an idea based on certain needs or observations that you have. You develop an idea and share that idea with other people, and that idea becomes known by others with their cognitive capabilities, and which then and this idea then, because it seemingly metaphorically floats around in the collective consciousness of humans or of a society, that then becomes apart from or beyond nature or beyond physics, and you would call that metaphysics if you so want to do that. It's merely an idea, but what does it
But the idea, I mean, you say it's an idea, but it's a universal reality. Like every society has a striving towards justice. Every society has the experience of love. Every society, even atheists, operate by faith. It's like human beings. Like you married your wife based on faith. That's an act of faith. Like you married her based on the idea that the covenant that you're entering into with her will be faithfully kept within the terms that you've created the relationship, that the person that you knew whatever many years back that you married her is still going to be someone that you can continue to love 20 years into the future. This is prophecy. This is
Sure,
not.
sure, sure. But
That's prophecy. That's not science.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing. Like, reality is, every human has the need to eat, no matter where you are, no matter what kind of human you are, no matter what age you are, what gender you are. Every human has the need to eat. It is universal. It is identical. When you talk about justice, for example, all human beings in the world, all societies in the world have an idea of justice. That is, however, entirely different, you could say, from culture to culture, or in some ways similar, because they are based on similar needs, on similar natural needs. But humans simply develop them and come up with them independently from each other, because they have a need to live together, to survive. That is an idea. In anthropology, that is described as, I forgot what the word for that is, but these are things that are developed independently without the need for interaction, because they arise as a need to satisfy a natural function of humans and societies. But just because that exists, it doesn't really mean that it doesn't mean anything more than
I think it does. I
I
really think it does, and the reason why I say I really think it does is because what it shows is that there are real things that are governing our lives, the real things that we're interacting with that are not material.
I mean, they are tools, ideas based on.
They're more than ideas. They're more because they're emerging. They're emerging. They're emerging in such a universal way, and they're emerging from nature itself. And they're emerging in such a way that they can't be reduced to material things.
Okay,
it's like the little parts that make them up do not account for the wholeness that they are.
To connect this to where we are getting with this, what would you compare the existence of, as I call it, ideas to, in order to make a point in our discussion?
So I guess, I mean, I do want to come on to the topic of God, because we've only got like 21 minutes left. I hope you're having fun.
I am. It's a very nice conversation. I really wanted to talk more about the idea of God and worshiping God and believing in God and his expectations from humanity and all that, but we have spent quite a lot of time talking about some interesting stuff. But
yeah, well, I didn't. I mean, if you had come on time, we could have talked about the direction of the conversation, but someone didn't come on time and they arrived after I started the live stream. Just saying.
Only 1 minute. Only 1 minute.
Like, so get here on time. So kind of coming to God, the questioning one. Right. I want to sort of backtrack a bit.
See, now you're backtracking.
Yeah, I want to go back to the point of language, because you and I both agree that language is a metaphysical thing. It's
as far as you describe metaphysical, yeah, sure.
All right, and you and I would both agree. I believe I'm making a massive assumption here, but based on what we said earlier about science, that you would agree that mathematical structures exist in the universe, independent of the observer.
Yeah, there are certain theories within mathematics that I am not an expert in arguing, but the description of how you define mathematics within nature. But yeah, as far as two things exist, and if you want to identify how many things there are, you will count them, and that means 1, 2. Insofar in nature, mathematics exists. Insofar that you can measure certain distances and put a name to it, put certain numbers to them, it exists. Yeah, but
yeah. Those realities, those mathematical structures. So, for instance, the distance between the Earth and the Sun existed prior to any observer being able to go, that is XY distance.
Sure, yeah.
That distance existed.
Sure.
And I would argue to you that we learn mathematics from nature. So the process of
Sure. Yeah.
learning mathematics begins when a child can distinguish themselves from the other. So they understand themselves to be I, and then you're another one, and then you're another one, and then you're another one, and you're another one. And then someone comes along and goes, well, what happens if you put that one and that one together? You get two.
Yeah.
So
Right.
we learn maths from nature. We don't impose maths on nature.
Sure. Yeah. No, we interpret nature and learn it, and that's what we call maths. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. Would you agree that maths is a language?
Yeah. I mean, I guess so. Right.
Really? Would you agree that maths requires a mind?
That was what I was referring to at the beginning as theory of viewing mathematics within nature, but it exists independent of your mind. But in order
Correct.
to interpret and understand it, you
exactly.
need the mind.
Exactly. Mathematics requires a mind, but it exists independently of your mind, and it exists independently of my mind, and it exists independently of every human mind, but it still requires a mind.
Yeah. That is when we are talking about the field of knowledge of mathematics. What exists in nature is two sticks can be found together laying on the ground. That is a reality independent from whether you have a mind or not. What you can do with a mind is to look at those two sticks and to interpret that as, oh, look, there are two sticks. 1, 2. There are two sticks. This is what we call how we interpret the appearance of two sticks with our language that we have. So insofar, yeah.
So when we human beings do maths, what we're really doing is translating a language, a code that we can find in the universe, which requires a mind.
Sure.
Now, the point that I'm getting at is that every single thing that we look at in the material world can be described accurately with mathematics.
Yeah.
And my point to you is
quantities and distances and so on, whatever we describe. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And so my point to you is if these mathematical structures exist in the universe, independent of our observation, but we recognize that mathematics requires a mind, then I think we have a sound metaphysical reason and sound metaphysical reasoning to say that there is a mind behind the universe. Now, that mind, I hasten to add, on this logic alone, could not be, or in and of itself, described as the complete image of the Christian God. It couldn't be described as the complete image of any God, except perhaps a peculiar mathematician who just says God's a mathematician. But it would seem that we've got good, reasonable, and solid metaphysical reasoning to say that there is a mind behind the universe.
Okay, here's the thing. Let's say, completely hypothetically, just agree with me here for a second.
I will. I agree.
Hypothetically, there's nothing.
Amen.
And suddenly,
I agree.
And suddenly something pops into existence. Suddenly, three things pop into existence, like three, as in this, pops into existence and is thrown into three different directions.
Yeah.
And this happened without any trigger, without anything behind it at all. Something just exploded and three objects thrown into three different distances. If you now also pop into existence with a mind, you can look at that and look at three separate things and say, okay, there are three of those. This doesn't necessarily require that there is a design or a mind or anything behind this, right? This merely requires the existence of reality, and you only interpret that reality and say, look, three sticks. That's what we have.
But
Right?
but let me so your the thought experiment that you offer, the thought idea that I would say is fundamentally flawed.
I know that you was going to say that. But go ahead.
Yeah, but predictably, in shock move, Christian says atheist is wrong. But like this is a fundamentally flawed, even material way of thinking about the universe, because all material things have a material cause. At least insofar as we can trace them back to the point of the Big Bang, which, and you're quite right to point out, the Big Bang wasn't the beginning. The Big Bang came after the beginning. And incidentally, in the book of Isaiah, just to throw it in there, it does say, I am the Lord thy creator. I have created all things by my power alone. I have stretched out the heavens. But
propaganda.
Yeah. Takia. But the point that I'm getting to is that absolutely everything, down to the smallest quantum measurement, down to the largest thing, everything, absolutely everything, is coded in mathematics. Everything has mathematical structures. Everything has now. But the point is, and the thing is, because I was waiting for you to go no, but you didn't. Like, because if you think, go back and listen to yourself as we walked into this conversation. We both agree that these mathematical structures exist independently of our minds.
Of course. Here's the thing.
But we also agreed that mathematics requires a mind.
Sure, yeah.
And these mathematical structures, and when we do maths, and this is the key point, when we do maths, what we're doing is we're translating a language we're seeing in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
We're translating a language. We're translating a code that we see in the universe. Now, it doesn't matter how we count it, what numerals we use, or what system of counting, whether it's decimalization or imperial measurement, or God forbid, Roman numerals. Can you imagine trying to do physics with Roman numerals? It was kind of like, thank God for India. It's kind of like, the reality is that we are having a linguistic exchange with a universe.
I really want to jump in right now. I really want to jump
for it.
Here's the issue. I had a similar discussion with a Muslim theologian, a modernist Muslim theologian, a few months back, who apparently has some physics associate degree or something, and he was talking to me about the very same thing, about how there is a structure and a way that things are independent from our mind in the universe. I asked him a question, for example, about if we are in a room and we observe that something drops from the ceiling every 4 seconds, does that mean that this was, that there is a design behind this, that this was, meant to be that way, or does it just mean this is what we observe due to certain, physical realities around us? And he basically confirmed that this is actually the fact that a drop comes down from the ceiling every 4 seconds is actually proof that there is a certain structure and design within this room or this system. Not sure if you're going to argue the same thing, but I would say there is a difference between descriptive and prescriptive rules or systems or theories in nature, or in our world. When it comes to a certain rule or a certain system, a certain structure, as you want to call it, within the universe, you could say there is a descriptive structure. You can observe something that exists, and you can then put a name to it and explain it and say, we have observed that so and so many planets exist, and they orbit such a planet with such speed, and they have such distance between them. You could say that this rule exists, and this is a descriptive rule. It's not something that was necessarily created or meant to be that way, or imposed upon us, which would be rather prescriptive. So insofar, I would say yes, a structure exists, certain patterns exist. We observe them as they are, which, however, does not mean that there is more behind that there is anything to it. So what I usually do not understand in these conversations is what exactly would the point of that be, of pointing out these patterns.
Okay.
Do you get me?
I do get you. I do get you. I do get you. And it was a point very well made. But I'm not arguing from design.
Okay.
I mean, I obviously believe in design, but I'm not arguing from design. I'm arguing from language. I'm arguing for the logos. Because when we do mathematics, which is a language that we have been taught by the natural world, we're not imposing mathematics on the natural world. We're translating mathematics into our own language. Because those structures are being taught to us. That's why I mentioned about the baby that goes, the other one, the other one, the other one. Nature teaches them that there's these other ones, and then someone else goes, well, what happens if you put 1 and 1 together? You get 2. And what happens if you put 2 of these ones together? You get 4. So we're learning mathematics from nature. We're not putting mathematics onto nature.
Mm-hmm. And
when we do maths, regardless of how we explain them, and there's different mathematical translations. You can translate it in more than one way. So my great grandmother, God rest her soul, she used to do imperial measurements. So she counted in 12s. Everything was a 12th of something. Completely mind-boggling. Don't get it whatsoever.
I agree.
And when they brought in decimalization, she insisted it was European money. When they brought in that European money, it's like, what? It's the pound, Grandma. And it's like, no, it's European. Because she, in her mind, she couldn't, decimalization was a thing that was weird for her. But however we translate it, the reality is that we've got an exchange of language. The reason why I make this argument is because of what it says in Psalm 19, where it says, the heavens are telling of the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of his hands. So the universe has a language, a code written into it. And through mathematics, we're speaking that language. We're translating that language. And language requires a mind, which is a point you've already agreed with.
Okay, but why does a pattern which we describe require a deliberation behind it? That's what I'm asking, what I'm pointing out. If there is a certain repetition of things, or there are certain distances between two things. I mean, I kick a ball and then, or something falls from the sky and is in such distance to me. Why does that require that the distance which exists there, or the quantity of certain things, was created with a certain deliberation, with an intention?
It's not about it. It's about the language.
I know. I see. But
the point that I'm making is that we're learning.
Can I clarify? Can I clarify? I want to clarify. Sure. Sorry, I'm taking over your channel right now, but
it's all right. It's all right. You're welcome, Apostate Prophet. We love you. We love you, and we want you to have a joyful and happy life.
Yeah. So you have a pattern in nature. You have an observable reality in front of you, and you have a mind which functions and develops a language and then looks at those things.
No, stop. You're wrong.
Go ahead.
We are learning mathematics from nature.
How?
I've already tried to explain it. I'll do it again.
I explained the opposite. I said, yes, we are learning it insofar that we are merely describing a certain thing,
No,
which is a reality with our language.
The language that we're learning is something we learn from nature. The fact that there are differentiations between particulars and that they are countable is something that we learn from nature. It exists prior to observation. It exists.
You are right. I agree.
And this language. One second, Apostate Prophet, because I'm taking control of my channel again. This language we describe as the Logos, because it says in the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was with God. He was with God in the beginning. All things were made by him, and nothing that has been made without him. So that is the Word, the Logos. So what I'm saying is that there is a linguistic structure in the universe that we have learned from the universe that we call maths.
Okay. I want to rephrase it. You were understanding language here in this example more in the overarching sense, where we call mathematics a language. I was rather referring to spoken language and words.
Are you saying that mathematics isn't a language?
No. I am saying it. I was just in the example that I was just describing. I wasn't doing that. But what I'm saying is, it is true that two sticks are there on the ground. Two as in, it is true that these things are there lying on the ground. Humans develop, advance, become intellectually advanced, intellectually capable of communicating with each other and creating symbols in order to more efficiently communicate with each other. And they turn around and look at those things, and no matter who it is, if they have a functioning vision and a functioning mind, every single human looks at the ground and sees that these two things are indeed on the ground.
Right.
That is true. That's a reality.
Yeah, that is a reality. And what I'm saying is, because of that reality, we then learn the language of mathematics.
Yes,
Right. If we are learning someone else's language, whose language are we learning?
Well, it's okay.
Because hold on one second.
Maybe there's a
Apostate
miscommunication
Prophet,
in terms of the language.
listen, Apostate Prophet, listen. If we are learning someone else's language, and bear in mind, every single culture in every part of the world, even though they might count in different sort of numerical partitions, whether it be the imperial 12 or the European decimal, the reality is that every single culture in every part of the world, 2 is 2. Whether they call it DOS, whether they call it 2, whether they call it whatever it is in... Are you from Iran? Is your family from Iran?
Turkey.
Turkey. What's 2 in Turkish?
Iki.
Iki. So whether it's DOS 2 or Iki, 2 is the same. So the whole of the world is learning the language of God.
Here's the
As
issue.
it says, the heavens are telling of the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of his hands. Day to day pour forth speech.
I would say that there's nothing special behind this, though, because look at this. I would say that I don't understand the intention. I mean, I understand it. What I mean by I don't understand is I don't know why this is seen as something special. I don't think it's something very special. Like here, imagine a society. Imagine people who have not developed or who have never understood the language, as you may want to describe it, of mathematics, who have never come up with this basic idea of ascribing certain spoken words to quantities, right? But they have a language throughout. Now, you have a guy who has a bunch of apples piled up right next to him. You have some other guy who comes to him, and he wants apples, right? He says, "Hey, can I have apples?" The guy with the apples gives him one apple, but the guy who requested the apples is not satisfied, and he says, "Can I have another one, please?" So The guy gives him another apple. The next day he comes back, he asks for apples and says, I want as many apples as you gave me yesterday. So what do? He remembers, okay, I gave them so many apples. So he takes out 2 apples and gives it to them in order to better understand how many apples the other guy wants. In a community where people develop a proper language and where they use actual words for mathematics, he will say, oh, so you mean you want 2 apples? That's all there is to it. There are 2 apples. There is a quantity, 2 apples. You want 1 apple, 2 apples. But I don't.
No.
Here's the thing. It is a reality.
It's just a sucker punch. Go on,
2
give
apples.
me the sucker punch.
No. Here's the.
Go on, Apostate. Get him.
Here is the thing. Here's the thing.
Rooting for you.
I have 2 fists right now, right? I have 2 fists right now. You see
Yeah.
that? You have 2 things. You have a quantity of things, but that's all there is to it. In order to understand a quantity, a reality that you can observe in our world, you want to somehow describe it, and you say, this we call 2 in our language. In
No,
another
hold on
language,
one
you call it
Hold
zwei.
on
In
one
another
second.
language, you call it iki. That's it.
But the point is,
There's no inherent language behind
this.
this.
The point is, it's nature that's teaching us the language.
You interpret
That's
it.
yeah. We translate the language. We translate the language in the same way that if you spoke to me in Turkish, and let's pretend that I could understand Turkish, I could translate to a third party, hey, what Apostate Prophet just said in Turkish is X, Y, and Z. Every single culture in the world is translating a language that they have received from creation.
Okay, I guess I would argue that I don't agree with the same understanding of a language, or that mathematics is a language in that sense. I don't think.
But you
I don't
earlier
think,
said that mathematics is a language.
oh, yeah. No, it is a mathematics is a language.
There you go.
But
And where is
a
the
language? Here's the thing. It is a language insofar that we develop an understanding of the reality of certain quantities or measures in our worlds. It is then a language, and we can translate.
We're learning the language from reality, right? Not the other way around. We're not imposing mathematics on the world.
Okay, but here's the thing.
Look at it another way. Could a mathematician, if we've got a mathematician in Turkey and a mathematician in the United Kingdom, and the mathematician in the United Kingdom couldn't speak Turkish, and the mathematician from Turkey couldn't speak English, could they have a mathematical conversation with one another?
If they understand the symbols that
so the symbols are irrelevant because that's just translation. But could they have a mathematical conversation with one another?
Yes, insofar that they develop a language with which they interpret reality around.
Are the laws of mathematics universal to all cultures?
Yes, right.
Right. So we're getting this language not from any particular culture. It isn't a social construct. It isn't a cultural construct. We are literally learning it from the creation.
Okay, here's the thing. What I'm saying is, what we call language here in this case is only a descriptive set of rules with which we understand and interpret reality.
Where do we get those rules from?
Let me explain. Since the reality is the same regardless of where we are, because we all know, as established earlier, that there are these 2 things on the ground. Since that is the reality everywhere, no matter who you are and what language you speak, we are describing an undisputable, objective reality with our own words, with our own language, which we develop and which we call mathematics. That's all there is to it. We are only describing a reality.
So we are learning the mathematics from the world.
We are. I mean, yeah. If you say that mathematics is the quantity or the distance of things, but to interpret them, we develop a certain language.
Yeah,
it's not like it's a system.
Language is independent of mathematics. I mean, don't get me wrong; they cross over. But me speaking English is independent of mathematics. You speaking Turkish is independent of mathematics.
Sure.
Me and I learned I learned English because I'm a proud Anglo-Saxon. You learned Turkish because you're a proud Turk.
I'm not, but
and I'm not really a proud Anglo-Saxon. But the point that I'm making is our cultural languages are independent of the language of mathematics.
Okay, let's say for the sake of the argument that we completely agree.
The language of mathematics is a true language.
Okay.
And languages require mind.
Okay.
So we have, I would suggest to you as one genuine seeker after the truth speaking to another genuine seeker after the truth, that we have a very firm, very clear, and very direct, observable, and real metaphysical proof of mind behind the universe.
I don't agree with that.
And on that bombshell, ladies and gentlemen, on that bombshell, you sound like you really want to keep going.
I do really want to talk about. I really do want to talk about the logic of God and belief and disbelief and judgment and the all-knowing and so on. But that is
how about
a whole 1 hour discussion.
How about I come onto your channel?
Okay.
And we do a round 2.
Okay, we'll do that.
Yeah,
we'll do that. Okay.
Apostate Prophet, it has been an absolute pleasure, a real joy, and a really wonderful moment to talk to you. And I've really enjoyed your discourse, and the way you conduct yourself demonstrates the superiority of atheism over Islam. And I really do value, your contribution to sort of the public discourse. And I look forward to talking to you again.
I assume that you were entirely genuine in everything that you said right now, and there was no joking in there. But
no.
Okay.
Does this face look like a face that can joke?
I'm used to very different discussions, so I always have to assume that there might be something here, something going on behind the appearance. But no,
bro. As you get to know me, you'll realize that I wear my heart on my sleeve.
I know. I'm just kidding. We've had a very good conversation, a very nice conversation, and I'm not really doing it justice with my terrible description of it right now, but I really enjoyed this. I think it was very good, very insightful. I love these discussions. This is the stuff that I want to talk about. Not necessarily the topic. I just want to talk more honestly, more deeply about questions that we have, just the way you and I have talked for 2 hours now. And I've completely enjoyed this discussion. There was not a moment within these 2 hours that I felt discomfort or anything like it. I just loved this. Why can't we have more such discussions between all kinds of different groups? I really am very happy and very thankful that you invited me here, and I'm looking forward to inviting you to my channel and to keeping in touch further so that we can have more such productive, wonderful conversations and seek truth. And I also want to destroy and humiliate you while eating grapes as a result.
I look forward to my destruction and humiliation. Anyway, I'm going to close in a prayer, and I'm sure you'll think it's appropriate considering the argument, the canticle that I choose. So this is Celi Enerant. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. One day telleth another, and one night certifieth another. There is neither speech nor language, but their voice are heard among them. Their sound is gone out into all lands, and their words into the ends of the world. In them hath he set a tabernacle for the sun, which cometh forth as a bridegroom out of his chamber, and rejoiceth as a giant to run his course. It goeth forth from the uttermost part of the heaven, and runneth about unto the end of it again. And there is nothing hid from the heat thereof. The law of the Lord is undefiled law, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, and giveth wisdom unto the simple. The statutes of the Lord are right, and rejoiceth the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, and giveth light unto the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, and endureth forever. The judgments of the Lord are true, and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is thy servant taught, and in keeping of them is great reward. Who can tell how oft he offendeth? O cleanse thou me from my secret faults. Keep thy servant also from presumptuous sins, lest they get the dominion over me. So I shall be undefiled and innocent from the great offense. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be always acceptable into thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. God bless you, Apostate Prophet. It was really lovely.
Wonderful.
And I can't wait to speak to you again. God bless.
Same. Thank you. And stay away from Islam.
Never.